Alan and Sean here from the Prancing Pony Podcast, welcoming you to the Tolkien Experience Podcast.
The Tolkien Experience Podcast is an attempt to bring the fan and scholarly communities together around our shared passion, the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Each episode features a notable scholar or member of the fan community sharing their Tolkien experience.
And now we'll send you over to Sarah and Luke.
Thanks, Alan. I'm Luke Shelton.
And I'm Sarah Brown.
Every other week, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any further delay, let me introduce our guest. For this episode, I interviewed Mary Clay Watt. Mary Clay is the host and creator of the podcast That's What I'm Tolkien About. In her podcast, Mary Clay is working her way through Tolkien's works. So far, she's been reading through The Lord of the Rings for the first time. Each episode, she has a special guest join her as she reacts to each chapter. This is particularly interesting because Mary Clay knows very little about The Lord of the Rings before she started the podcast, so we're getting an unfiltered, very first reaction to each chapter as she reads. I am elated to welcome Mary Clay Watt to the podcast, and I can't wait to see what she says about her Tolkien experience. All right, I'm very excited to be joined by Mary Clay, and if you don't mind, we'll just start with the first question. How were you introduced to Tolkien's work?
Yeah, I guess I kind of always knew about it's always existed in my mind, but I never watched the movies or anything like that growing up. I was pretty young, I'd say, when the movies came out, maybe I think like elementary school. So it wasn't exactly my, appropriate for my age. Maybe if I'd been a little bit older, I would have gone to see the movies and stuff. But my only exposure to it really was like catching glimpses of it on TV, or if my like older brother was watching it or something. And then I have a lot of friends who are into Lord of the Rings or into a lot of different fandoms and, kind of like nerdy, geeky stuff. So a lot of them have liked Lord of the Rings. So up until a year ago, I had zero. Actually, no, I take that back. The one and only time that I have seen Fellowship of the Ring was for a class in college. Let's see, that would have been in, I think 2016, actually. And that was the first time I had ever seen a movie, and I didn't really like it. Honestly, I was like, this is taking forever to get going. And I was really mad at the end because I thought that they were going to destroy the ring at the end. So when it was like, oh, there's 5 minutes left and they are nowhere near Mount Doom, I was like, oh, so this is like way longer than I thought. So I never watched any of the other movies. And then a year ago, I came up with a funny joke and tweeted about it and was basically saying like someone should have a podcast about Lord of the Rings called That's What I'm Tolkien About. And that's kind of like where my journey began, where I had some friends encourage me and help me get that off the ground. And that's where I started reading the books.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you decided to read the books before viewing the other 2 films?
Yes, that's correct. I wanted to go in kind of as blindly as possible, which actually turned out like more blindly than I thought because I didn't remember a lot about the first movie. In particular, I had zero memory that Boromir dies. And I actually got spoiled on that when I was reading Fellowship, and like halfway through I found out. I was like, what? Boromir dies? What? And everyone was like, yeah, it's in the first movie. How did you not? You said you've seen that movie. How do you not remember this? Yeah, so I didn't watch the other 2 movies so I could kind of give as firsthand, like blind reaction as possible.
Yeah. So in your reading, how surprised were you that Boromir didn't die till the second book?
Yeah, so that's what's funny is the the two guys who helped get That's What I'm Talking About off the ground and we've since started a network of our podcasts, Tyler Carlin and Ethan Edgehill, they actually kind of spoiled it for me. I'd already found out that he died, but we were texting and I mentioned that oh yeah, I just finished the last chapter of Fellowship of the Ring. It's crazy that I've already finished the first book. And they were like, oh, so Rip Boromir, right? And I was like, what? What do you mean? That didn't happen at all. And they were like, what? What do you mean it didn't happen? And then I had an absolute hilarious reaction when I started Two Towers, because you get to the bottom of the first page and he dies.
Mm-hmm.
He barely makes it into Two Towers at all. So, yeah, I was pretty surprised, even though I'd still been spoiled on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty George R.R. Martin-esque of, here, first page, let's kill a main character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just shake people's confidence immediately.
Yeah, exactly. If hey kids, this is going to be a bit of a darker book as we move forward with this journey.
So, yeah, I really thought that your experience has got to be fascinating, because I haven't listened to all the episodes, but I've listened to several, and I always really like kind of the kind of raw unfilteredness that you bring to your episodes. That's just kind of here's my honest response to it, and that's what I love, and that's the kind of thing that I love capturing on my podcast too. So that's why I felt like I had to get you on. So of your reading so far, because I know you're not completely done, but what is your favorite part of The Lord of the Rings so far?
Right. Well, for the sake of the listeners, at this point, as we're recording, let me think. I'm into book 6, chapter 2. So the next chapter I read is, my theory is that the next chapter I'm reading is Mount Doom. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that okay, this is it. We're gonna do it finally. So that's where I am currently in the story. My favorite part, I liked all the stuff with Treebeard and the Ents. I like all the stuff with the elves. I love Legolas and Gimli. They're great.
Mm-hmm. So if I had to ask you to pick a favorite, which one of those scenes sticks out to you the most?
I guess I'll go with the chapter on Treebeard, where Merry and Pippin discover him and awaken the Ents. Mm-hmm. Just because to me it's such a funny idea that there's this old ancient power entity in the Ents that has been asleep for hundreds or thousands of years, however long, and the people to awaken, in this fellowship we have a wizard, we have an elf, a dwarf, we have really strong, powerful men, and the ones who awaken this power are Merry and Pippin, the derpiest hobbits that we've come across. And I just love that it's this unsuspecting characters that awaken one of the most powerful entities in the story.
Yeah, it's I can't remember where I first heard it. I think it was one of Tolkien's letters. It says that one of his major themes is the ennoblement of the, it's not ignoble, but something like that. It's raising up people who you wouldn't expect. And it's that's perfect. That's exactly what happens over and over again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love the Treebeard episode too, just because Treebeard is just such a remarkable character in the whole scope of the work. It's who expected there to be a talking tree dropped in the middle of this book?
I know. And currently, yeah, so like I mentioned, I'm like getting towards the end of the story, and currently I'm just really mad because the Ints have done like I've just been, I mean, and I could be wrong, who knows, maybe they will show up in the nick of time, but I'm like really mad because they really could be helping things out a lot right now, and they are just choosing not to because they're like, no, our beef with Saruman's done, like we already solved that. Okay, you have fun saving the rest of the world, we're gonna chill here. And I'm like, no, you could be helping us so much.
So that raises the question for me, do you feel the same way about Tom Bombadil?
Oh my gosh. So as like in the, I don't know, past 2 minutes since you first asked the question, like what's your favorite part so far, I remembered, I was like, I can't believe I didn't mention Tom Bombadil. what an enigma, man. And I already know that he's not in the movies, and like I understand why from a like storytelling, like movie perspective, that it doesn't really, it would like completely derail the movie for a good 15 minutes to just have this completely random character come in and just be nonsensical and insane and just totally derail the story. So I understand why they cut him out of the movie, but like, man, what a guy. And I wish, like, I'm sure so many more people in the fandom, I wish we knew more,
So normally I ask my participants, what's your fondest experience of Tolkien's work? Because a lot of the participants have like read the books multiple times or read books and played video games and movies and stuff. So I wonder if you do have kind of a fondest memory maybe of this read through, which kind of episode or something like that sticks out to you as like the most fond experience that you had with the work.
Right. Well, I have a friend, Bethany, who lives where I live, and she's also a big Lord of the Rings fan. And I've had her on the podcast a couple times. And because we live in the same city, I can have her like physically come over to my house and we sit down and we record. And I've loved doing that, like getting to hang out with her. This is a friend from college who I didn't who like we were good, we were friendly in college and good friends, but it had been a while since we both graduated and I hadn't seen her in a while, and she moved to this city. And so it was nice that Lord of the Rings and my podcast kind of popped up when it did, because it was a good way to like reignite our friendship. And now we get to talk, like we talk all the time about Lord of the Rings, and I like subsequently kind of reverse our relationship where she knew everything about Lord of the Rings and I knew nothing. I got her into Avatar: The Last Airbender when it hit Netflix. And so like that was really fun for us to like, for me to sit and watch her experience it for the first time. So, and also I would just say in general, the like podcast in general has brought about a lot of friendships that I wouldn't have predicted like this time a year ago.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We need to tread carefully here, because this could very easily turn into a Avatar: The Last Airbender podcast. I had friends who loved it, and so when it hit Netflix, I binged the whole show, and now I'm just like, okay, who wants to talk?
Yeah, exactly.
But it sounds like the podcast itself has been a really valuable thing for you to make friendships and form a community around not just Tolkien's work, but also the enjoyment of a text. Yeah. Also, well, just a quick side note, as we're recording yesterday, I released a bonus episode, and my friend Bethany came on, and we did a bonus episode specifically to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender. So, and it was usually my bonus episodes are like 20 to 30 minutes. This one was like a full length episode. So we had a lot of feelings and, things to digest and think about. But yeah, it's definitely, like it's also weird for me because I can't fully be in the Lord of the Rings community because I don't know everything, and I'm trying to keep my reactions and everything as as blind as possible. So I can't I can't go on to like fun like Lord of the Ring
subreddits or like watch funny videos on YouTube or like get into conversations or whatever that in depth, because I don't know everything and I don't want to risk learning something that I'm not supposed to. And it's really hard with Lord of the Rings to try and not learn something, because it's such an old book and it's such an old piece of work that everyone in the internet already knows what's happened. So it's like, how do you not spoil someone when you already know what you know and you don't know what to consider a spoiler and what not to consider a spoiler? So it's kind of weird for me because I'm like half in this community and half out of it, because I can't fully immerse myself yet. I'm really excited to finish Return of the King. And because I'm not, so after I finish the book and I watch the movies, then I'll read The Hobbit. But I'm not as concerned about learning spoilers or anything about The Hobbit, because it's not, nearly on the scale that Lord of the Rings is. So I'm really excited to finish the book, because then I can I feel like I can finally start diving deep and being like, oh, these are the people in it, and here's what people are saying about this character and, this storyline and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're thinking about continuing the podcast past Lord of the Rings?
Yes. Yeah. It's actually a joke with my producers, Tyler and Ethan. They're like, you're covering anything that has Tolkien's name on it. Which we're kind of joking about and kind of half not joking about. So yeah, right now the plan is I'll finish Return of the King, and then I will watch the movies and I will do several episodes on those, I'm sure. And then I'll start reading The Hobbit, and then I will do the Hobbit movies. And then that's when I can move into doing other stuff that's kind of more like spin-offs or something. I'll cover the Tolkien movie. Oh, also, that does remind me. I should say, give the disclaimer that I fully know that you're supposed to pronounce it Tolkien, and I pronounce it Tolkien because that's how it works for the pun of my podcast name. So I'm fully aware. No one needs to come at me and tell me that I'm saying it wrong. I know I'm saying it wrong. But yeah, so the way that I got spoiled about Boromir's death is I was Google searching to see if the cartoon movie was available on the internet somewhere. And literally all I did was Google search Lord of the Rings cartoon. And it was like the third on the first page of Google. It was like the third recommended video on YouTube. And it just says Boromir's death.
Oh gosh.
So now I not only do I have like a personal vendetta against this, but I've also heard it's just like zany and ridiculous, and I'm excited to watch that. And then what I'm hoping is that I will have done enough stuff that the Amazon Prime series will come out at that point. And then I can cover that on the podcast and push off having to read the Silmarillion because I've had a lot of requests to cover it, but I'm just not sure how I could cover it in a fun and interesting way that would be, that would be fun for people to listen to. So we'll see. But yes, there are currently lots of plans to keep covering Tolkien related works, and I'm sure I'll go into the other series or stories that he written that are, not Lord of the Rings. I can't remember the names of any of them now, but yeah. And then kind of just, taking it bit by bit, and there might come a day where I'm like, you know what, I'm really truly out of stuff that I want to cover. And maybe it's time to retire the podcast, or maybe it's time for me to move on to a different series or something like that. But we'll see when we get there.
Yeah. So one of the great things about Tolkien is you're exactly right. He has written so much that you could just keep going.
Yep.
So my next question is, has the way you approach Tolkien's work changed over time? And I know that you talked a little bit about how you didn't really like the movie when you first saw it, but then after making the joke, you decided to dive in. could you kind of detail the transition between not liking the movie to being okay with covering the book a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess my main gripe with the movie is just that I wasn't really paying attention that well. There were just so many characters.
Mhm.
I was like, I don't know who any of these people are. I don't know what the stakes are in this right now. I thought we were going to be destroying the ring, and we're not destroying the ring. So I just wasn't really invested in it. So it's not necessarily that I had complete negative feelings about it, and it was more that I just didn't have any feelings invested in the movie. So when I started the books, I tried to go in with as open a mind as possible. I did have some expectations. I was like, I have a feeling that this is going to be reading old-timey language, and sometimes it is. And I have a feeling that there aren't going to be that many female characters, which I was correct about. And maybe the pacing is going to be hard to get into, and some of these overarching expectations. But other than that, I was like, I'm going in totally blind, and I'm ready to feel or think whatever I feel or think. And so I think the first thing that surprised me about it is that Tolkien has this great sense of humor, and it especially comes out with the hobbits. So I think that really helps that when you start Fellowship of the Ring, you're with the hobbits until chapter 7 or 8 or something. So I think that kind of helped ease into the world, because the journey, also the story and the journey doesn't start with them all doom and gloom. It's a lot more lighthearted, and it kind of eases its way into it as you read along this story. So, and then I guess it's also a really unique experience for me reading the books, because I'm reading it one chapter at a time, and when I read one chapter, I stop and I do not read the next chapter until I've recorded the episode for the previous chapter. Just in case I say something like, oh, well, I predict, in the next chapter, we're going to be at Mount Doom and we're going to destroy the ring. So I have to stop myself at each chapter. And there are a lot of times where I've been like, I really want to read the next chapter, right now. So I think it's been hard sometimes, where I feel like it's just chugging along because I have to stop myself and go at a really glacial pace. But at the same time, it's really interesting because I talk for each chapter for about an hour and a half, sometimes longer, with people who have with tons of people who have a variety of life experiences and opinions and thoughts and background about Lord of the Rings. There are some people who just got into it as adults. There are some people who I actually recorded this morning with someone whose mom was reading it when she was pregnant with her. So it was foretold before she was even born that she would be a Lord of the Rings fan. So that's what's really interesting for me about this experience of reading it and going through the story is getting to dissect it and look into it, and then hear all these also fun, interesting tidbits that I didn't know about, and hear that help provide context to why Tolkien wrote it the way he did.
Yeah, that's been one of the things that I can relate to as well. There's this kind of community that you find when you start asking other people about their experiences. And I have yet to find a personal story about Tolkien that I was not just captivated by. People all have their own unique interactions with the text. And when you really sit down and talk to them about it, it just gets so personal and so wonderful so quickly. It's, one of the things I really like celebrating on this podcast is that diversity of experience. And so that's, like I said earlier, one of the reasons why I knew we had to reach out to you and talk to you, because I can't think of anyone else who's, cataloging their first read through of the book like this. And so it's something I really want to encourage my listeners to go look into, because like I said, I think it's a wonderful project. And I think you do have that kind of unfiltered, here is a first reader response that we just don't really have cataloged very often.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. It's been really interesting getting to like share these raw, unfiltered thoughts. And I've also like come into a lot. I don't know. I always feel like I have to like give this like disclaimer and this warning of like, I'm not someone who came into this experience being like, this is going to be the best thing ever. I'm going to find no faults with it or whatever. Like, if I don't like something or a particular character, I'm not going to hide it just because it was, you know, my guest's favorite character or something like that. And like a part of me feels bad sometimes because I like, one of my least favorite characters is Sam. And he's a lot of people's favorite characters. And a lot of people are like, this isn't a story about Frodo. This is a story about Sam. And I just don't like him. And there are a lot of opinions like that where I have a lot of fun with it, I guess, is what I'm saying, is that I try not to take it, you know, even though it is a serious work and even though Tolkien was a serious man, I try in this, you know, in the year 2020 to have fun with it and make it more lighthearted.
Yeah. So with all of this ongoing experience that you have with Tolkien's work, at this point, do you think that you would recommend it? And why or why not?
I don't think I would recommend to people to do a podcast about Lord of the Rings chapter by chapter. At least if you haven't read it before. I wouldn't like, I'm not at all saying that like, oh, doing it, you know, reading one chapter once a week has like ruined the experience of reading it for me. It's not that. It's definitely just that I think it would be a lot more enjoyable if I could just read it at my own pace. And when there's a moment in the story where I just want to keep reading and I want to find out what happens, I can do that rather than having to stop myself. So if you want to read it, yes, definitely read it, and, you know, read it at your own pace, or, you know, listen to the audiobook, however you want to, however you want to consume it. Go for it, do it at your own pace. I don't think I would recommend doing it at such a slow pace as I am.
Yeah, I always had a hard time with like assigned readings in school for that same reason. You had to follow someone else's pace of going through the book. It's like sometimes I want to go faster and other times I want to go very slow because I don't understand what's going on.
Exactly. Yeah. I've been both of those times where I've been like, you know what, I'm just going to keep reading because I'm sure at some point I'll fall behind. So it'll all even out. And then there were times in college, particularly, where it would be like, okay, everyone, next time we meet on Thursday, you should have read half of this book. And I'm like, what now? Like, I have 5 other classes and I have, you know, 3 other books to be reading and essays to write. I can't read half of a book in a day. Like, that's absurd.
So the last question I want to ask is, I know we've talked a little bit about your podcast. Would you mind sharing, you know, the way that our listeners can find the podcast and what they can expect if they start listening to it?
Yeah, sure. Again, my podcast is called That's What I'm Tolkien About. It's very annoying because if you search like Tolkien in Apple Podcasts, it like comes up. It's like one of the last recommended things. And I'm like, really? Like, there are other podcasts that don't even have the name Tolkien in it that come up before mine. Anyway, but if you search for That's What I'm Tolkien About, you should be able to find it. It's available wherever you get podcasts, on Spotify and whatnot. You can also follow the social medias on Twitter at Tolkien About Pod and on Instagram at Tolkien About Pod. I have a particularly fun time I make a lot of memes. I try and make one every single week that has to do with the chapter and the episode that comes out. And a lot of I've like found that one of my weird niche talents is making Lord of the Rings memes. And it's really fun, and like I have an entire folder saved on my computer that's just for like, oh, this could be like a great meme about Pippin, or this could be a great one about Boromir or something like that. So yeah, go follow on Twitter and Instagram at TolkienAboutPod, and then also go to wbne.org if you want to listen to the other shows that are on the network that Tolkien About is on. There's a Dungeons and Dragons podcast. There's a musical theater podcast. And then my producers, Tyler and Ethan, they have a podcast about movies that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's all very like friendly, casual stuff. So yeah, go check all of that out.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I've had a fantastic time hearing about your experience, and I know that our listeners will enjoy this episode as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We have a lot of fun making these podcasts.
So much fun. It's always exciting to talk to fans and scholars about their Tolkien experience.
If you want to know more about the ways to connect with this episode's guest that they mentioned in this interview, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. Also, don't forget to follow the podcast on your favorite social media sites.
That's right. We're on Facebook as Tolkien Experience, and also on Twitter as @TolkienEXP. So don't forget to like, follow, share, and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking with our guests. You can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I am @LukeB.Shelton.
You can also look for me on Twitter, where I am @AaronLPalmadill. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.